So this video lesson is all about what it means to subtract with negative integers. And so just like the other lessons, we're going to start out with an idea of what subtraction is in a familiar context. We'll build on that until we discover what the rules are for subtracting with negative integers, and then we'll offer a few practice problems so that you can go through them and see how comfortable you are. So first we want to figure out fundamentally, what does subtraction represent? And if we think back to something that doesn't involve negative integers, just saying, what does 25 minus 14 really mean? We could say a number of different things, including setting up this subtraction using place value columns, 25 minus 14. Know that 5 minus 4 in the ones column is 1. Know that 2 minus 1 in the tens column is also 1, representing a 10, so 25 minus 14 is 11. We can also look at it as if we had 25 books, let's say. If we had 25 books and we wanted to take away, since we have 25 of them, we wanted to take away 14 of them. If we had 25 books and we took away 14, then we would end up with 11 left. So on one hand, fundamentally, subtraction really means taking objects away from a larger group. You start out with one group and you take them away. And this one representation of it is only really helpful when you're talking about positive integers, in which case you have a group of something. You can identify a group of trees, a group of books, a group of pineapples, a group of something, a group of people. But in order to do that, we have to have positive integers. On the other hand, we can talk about subtraction as a distance on a number line. So if we had that idea that we had before, 25 minus 14, when we draw our number line, we have 25 at one point, we have 14 at another point, and by the old definition, we would leap back 14 because that is what we do when we take away. But in this case, we're really looking at this distance in between. How much space is there between 15 and 25? And in that distance in between, all we would have to do is take 25 minus 14 is 11. There are 11 feet between 14 and 25, 11 units, 11 leaps of a single number. And finally, we get to something that's a little bit more difficult to understand in this wording, but a concept that you're familiar with, which is the inverse operation of addition. Now what this means is more or less that subtraction is the opposite of addition. But technically in math vocabulary, we call it an inverse operation. Specifically, if you have a number, let's say 5, and you add another number, let's say 7 to it, to undo the operation of addition, you subtract 7 using the same number, plus 7 minus 7. Those two operations cancel out, and this answer is 5. This is what we mean by an inverse operation, that subtracting by one number will undo adding by another number. So with the second two of those ideas in mind, starting with the distance on the number line, let's go ahead and look at subtraction. Subtraction is the distance between numbers. Now here we have a map that centers around New York City. And if we're looking at subtraction as the distance between numbers, we can look at it as a distance between places also. Let's say we were trying to drive from Philadelphia in the lower left-hand corner of the map, I should say in the southwest corner of the map, up to New Haven, Connecticut in the northeast corner of the map. Well, we know that Philadelphia is a certain distance from New York. And we know that New Haven is a certain distance from New York. And we know that the distance between New Haven and Philadelphia is this overall distance. So one way that we can find the distance from Philadelphia to New York is to add the distance in red to the distance in blue. By doing that, we'll be able to find the distance from Philadelphia to New Haven. Now we wouldn't say that the distance, if we were saying the distance from Philly to New York and the distance from New York to New Haven is if we put them together to find the distance from Philly to New Haven, we wouldn't say the distance that from Philadelphia to New Haven is any less than the distance from Philadelphia to New York, or any less than the distance from New York to New Haven. That's because it is the combination of the two. So even though they are on different sides of New York, and the blue distance may be something around 40 miles, and the red distance something around 60 to 80 miles, what is important is that the distance from Philadelphia to New Haven overall is the sum, more or less, of the distances between Philadelphia and New York and New Haven. Now let's take a look at that on a number line to see that in a different idea. If we were looking at this, subtraction is the distance between numbers, and we say started with negative 15, which we're going to use as represented by this arrow, and positive 20, which we are going to represent as the distance with this arrow. Now, if we took subtraction and just looked at it initially as 20 minus a negative 15, it wouldn't be entirely obvious what subtraction is or what it represents. But in this case, if we think of it as the distance between numbers on a number line, we find that this distance from negative 15 to 20 is actually the difference or the answer to the subtraction problem that we're looking for. So how do we get to this actual number? Well, what we actually look for is we have the 15 units here that represents the distance from negative 15 to 0, or in other words, the absolute value of negative 15. And we have the distance from 0 to 20, which is 20, or also the absolute value of 20. So when we talk about subtraction as the distance between numbers, if we have a positive number and a negative number, we're going to end up adding their absolute values. This distance here is 35. So 20 minus negative 15 is 35. But that doesn't quite answer whether or not this should be a positive 35, whether or not this should be a negative 35, or why entirely it should be either of them, which is why we now look at subtraction as the inverse of the operation of addition. So again, let's have, this time we're going to have 15 minus negative 15. Well, our 15 starts out here. We start with 0 and leap to 15. Now, we're going to subtract negative 15. Now, if we just brought negative 15 here and looked at it like this, we would be doing the same operation as addition, because 15 plus negative 15 is 0. So 15 minus negative 15 can't be 0. But if we look at subtraction as the opposite of addition, then we take whatever second number we have, and we can turn it to represent the opposite of itself. So, in this idea, we now have an operation of 15 minus negative 15, which gives us an answer that is greater than 15. And if we look at it, subtracting 15 is actually subtracting negative 15 is actually the same operation as adding a positive 15. Now let's say we did this backwards. Flip this again. And we had negative 15 minus a positive 15. Well, in this case, we're going to start with the negative 15. And we can't just add a positive 15 on top of it, because that would be the same as adding positive 15. But subtraction is the opposite of addition. And conveniently, this gives us the same idea as subtracting a 15 or adding a negative 15. So what becomes obvious when looking at it like this is that when you are subtracting a number, you are adding the opposite value of it. So for any two integers, what does that mean when we say 25 minus a negative 14? Well, we saw in the first slide that it represents the distance between numbers, but it also represents the inverse operation of addition. So this is 25 plus the opposite of negative 14. Well, the opposite of negative 14 is a positive 14. So that is 25 plus 14 is 39. So, to subtract integers, you add the opposite of the number being subtracted. That is 25 minus 37 represents the same as 25 plus a negative 37. And if you're unfamiliar with how to add together integers that have opposite signs, go ahead and look back at the adding integers, particularly the adding with negative integers video lesson, and we get negative 12. At the same time, 25 minus negative 37 is the same as 25 plus 37 plus a positive 37, which is 62. So we're going to do one final example here so that this video doesn't go on too long. And so remember this problem again, 25 minus negative 14. Well, if we remember that 25 minus negative 14 is this 25 plus the opposite of negative 14. So add the opposite, we add 14, and we get to 39. When really, there are three letters we need to remember when it comes to subtracting integers, and those are K, C, C. Keep, change, change, which is keep the first number, change the operation from subtraction to addition, and change the sign of our second number. Going back to this idea, 25 minus a negative 14, we have keep the 25, change the subtraction to an addition, and change a negative 14 to a positive 14 to get 39. And now, so go ahead, stop this video, and go back to the video that has the practice problems for subtracting with negative integers and see how you do there. And if you're unfamiliar with the idea, or if you're having trouble with it, come back to this lesson and look at it again.